New York City has received 30,000 students now, approximately, recent migrants. And a couple of things are happening in our schools. The students arrive with huge needs. They don't speak our language. They have huge learning gaps. The schools, they are just not capable of dealing with this influx and really being able to serve them. The city is in a very difficult financial situation because of the migrant crisis and because of, we never really recovered from COVID. So cafeteria is the latest one that also our community is very upset about. There are a number of items on the school menus that have been cut to save money. It was explicitly saying that. There's a memo from the food department at the Department of Education saying that. New York City deprioritized children. Children were last in the list of priorities for New York lawmakers during the entirety of COVID. Now they are literally giving up on a generation of children and saying, you all are not going to learn as much as, the older children. And it's completely unacceptable.
Hello and welcome to New York Insider. Today we sit down with Daniela Souza Igorov to talk about immigrants and specifically how their presence is affecting New York City schools. Daniela Igorov, thank you for coming on New York Insider. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Before we jump in and talk about immigration, I want you to please tell us about your official capacity with New York City schools. It's an elected position. Right?
Yes, it is an elected position. I'm not here in an official capacity, but yes, I'm a parent elected at the Community Education Council for District 2. So District 2, it covers 2/3 of Manhattan. And yes, I have one child now enrolled in the public schools here in New York City.
Okay. And because of that, you ran for this office.
Yes.
And the name of the position again is?
I'm vice president. I am on my second term, so
Okay.
I ran 3 years ago, and yes, and then got reelected almost a year ago.
And describe the position.
So we are an advisory board for the mayor and for the Department of Education. So when New York City had mayoral control, so the mayor took over all the school boards, they kept this structure so parents could provide advisory. So we pass resolutions. They are non-binding. The mayor doesn't have to follow what we're saying, but it's a way for parents to be able to provide input and advise on issues that are impacting our children's education.
So now in that capacity, you have, in a sense, jurisdiction over, or you have access to a number of schools within Manhattan, 2/3 of the schools?
A lot of what happens is that parents reach out to us when, usually when they have problems, right?
Yeah,
with
right.
the public schools. If they reach out to their principal and to the superintendent and their issue could not be resolved, they usually then reach out to us. I have now been doing this for a long time, and particularly during COVID, I was very active on trying to reopen our schools, to unmask our children, and also on the fight against the elimination of gifted and talented and merit admissions in our district. So there are a number of parents who now reach out to me when there's something that they don't like that is happening in their public school.
Okay, so as large as the public schools are, that's how many issues there are with the public schools.
There are a number of issues, yeah, but in my district, I think there has been, a couple of issues that have really, that parents have been very passionate about.
Very vocal about.
Yes.
So today we're going to talk about one of those, which is immigration.
Yes.
So big picture, what has the immigration situation here in New York in the last several months meant to the schools that you see?
Yes, it's been very difficult. And I think that's why I've been speaking so much, because I think that this failure between federal policy and state policies and even, city policies are all ending up in our public schools, right? And sometimes teachers and principals and school communities are having to deal with these problems, and they don't have the capacity to deal with this. So New York City has received 30,000 students now, approximately, that have, recent migrants. And a couple of things are happening in our schools. One is that schools are still receiving a large number of students without any predictability. And so literally like the next day, you have a number of students enroll in your school.
No forecast,
no
heads
forecast,
up. Next
no
week we're
heads
going to
up.
get.
Yes, exactly. I do think that the city has tried to manage, or Department of Education has tried to manage as possibly as they can, but it really is an impossible situation, right? When you have 30,000 new students arriving in such a short period of time.
That's the beginning of the school year.
This is since last school year, yes. So a little bit more than 1 year. The students not necessarily speak English, not necessarily have been in school recently, because a lot of them have done the cross through the border, so they have spent a long time not being in schools. Right. And so there is you're receiving a student population that has huge needs, right? And as I mentioned in my testimony to Congress, they also are going through the deadliest land border in history, right? That has been recorded by the United Nations. That's what our south land border is now, is the deadliest. It's been so documented, all the human rights violations that are happening there. So, for example, 6 in 10 women and girls who cross are suffering sexual violence. What that means is that 6 in 10 girls who are arriving in our schools have suffered sexual violence through their crossing. And so the students arrive with a huge needs. They don't speak our language. They have huge learning gaps. And the schools, they are just not capable of dealing with this influx and really being able to serve them. And of course, this is impacting the existing students, right? It would be it would be naive of us to think that there's no impact on the students that are there. And as I have said many times, the context is there. New York City closed schools for a long time during COVID. We closed schools even after we opened bars, we opened stadiums for musical concerts,
during
restaurants,
COVID.
Exactly.
Right.
We mask our kids for a very long time, so a lot of the children have language delays. They are not learning to read at the adequate time that we usually expect. And that school year, last school year, was the first one that it would be our first normal school year in a very long time, where we would start addressing the learning gaps that have created because of the COVID mandates. There is a report by the state controller saying how New York learning gaps have been so huge compared to other states in the country. And then when you had your first year where you're going to now really address the learning gaps, you have this influx of students. And so our schools have been in crisis after crisis after crisis.
For 3-4 years now.
Yes, exactly. And I think, we are seeing that impact on test scores and on learning outcomes for our children.
Mm-hmm. So that's maybe issue number one. That's close to your heart because you have 2 children, one of whom is in schools, right? And you see delays even in your own child, right?
Oh, yes.
And in his peers?
Absolutely. I mean, I have an oldest child who, they have been to the same schools, but one who was never masked, who never had Zoom school, until when he was in 2nd grade. And he learned to read normally. And my little one had his entire preschool experience basically was masked. He was in a private preschool, so he did not have school closure because the private schools closed for 3 months and then they quickly reopened. But I have seen how he has struggled with reading, and we're very fortunate. We hired him a tutor, and really we are addressing the learning gap personally, but the majority of New York City families cannot afford a private tutor, And so the schools need to fill that gap and really be able to.
Do you think even if they could afford a tutor, do you think there are many parents, families who are not aware of this gap?
Exactly. So, so this is also, I think, the benefit of having a mother who has spent, a decade on education policy and reading everything that you can about, science of reading instruction. And so I knew exactly also how to see the red flags, both in his school curriculum and also in how he was developing, and very quickly, address that. In the middle of kindergarten, when his first report card came and we saw that he was not on track, we like, okay, we need to get a tutor, let's do this, and we addressed very quickly. So I think that there is these two parts. It's you need to be able to see the problem and to know how to react, but also you need to have the resources, right? You need to be able to pay a tutor, to have the time to do that, after school and all of that.
Yeah. So this gap that you see in your son and maybe in other students,
yes,
and the school certainly sees it as well. I mean, there's data points now.
There's
there are
plenty
huge
of data.
delays. This is a multi-year, multifaceted problem, starting with COVID, but the latest straw on the camel's back is the immigrant surge. So
yes.
How exactly, if you can give us some details, why are these 30,000 students, or how are these 30,000 students coming into New York City schools creating more of a problem in terms of delays in student learning?
Yes. So I think that the problem is, as I mentioned, the schools were not ready, right, to absorb such a large number of students with such a different learning needs than the current population. So, for
Highly
example,
needy kids.
Yes. So, for example, there are kids who didn't speak English, and there were schools that did not have bilingual teachers. And so there were literally in our district, there were students who were translating for the new students. And as I said, like either the new student is not being served because he's learning from a fellow student, and the current student is not learning because it's literally like translating for for their new classmates. And so this is one example of one thing that happened. There are schools that have addressed this by creating 2 classes in a grade, like with the students that were here before and new migrant students, which also, again, it's not how, it sounds horrible, right? It's not how America operates, but it's how the schools are trying to deal with this impossible situation that they have received. And the funding came very late. Now there is extra funding for you to hire bilingual teachers. But in the beginning, when they just started to arrive, like the schools didn't have anything. Like the PTAs and the parent communities had to raise funds, to be able to provide. And as I mentioned, I mean, these families arrive with so many needs, right? So from, the violence that they're witnessing at the border, arriving here then, and, I'm sure you have seen about the conditions of our shelters and the violence that is happening there. So there are a number of issues that I think are contributing for creating this sense of chaos that, these families, and then it's ending up in our schools.
Yeah. And sometimes just 1 or 2 highly needy children within a classroom are enough to kind of tilt the whole dynamic of that classroom.
Yes, and I think that I'm co-founder of a charter school that was specifically designed to serve students who speak a different language, right? When you are serving student populations who have different needs, like you need to have a curriculum design, and there's so much thought that goes into it, and high experienced educators who know how to teach, specific populations, who have the certification. Like, we don't have any of this capacity now. We're literally just throwing children who might have different needs, who might have different speak a different language, in regular public schools who were never designed to serve children. Like, if you have half of your class who don't speak English or who haven't been in school for 2 years, these schools were not designed. They are not capable to teaching this.
So this is a big impact on teachers?
It is a huge impact on teachers, a huge impact on principals, and I think in the entire school community.
And so parents call you, is that right? Because they're complaining about this?
Yes.
Do you have any specific stories from parents?
Well, so last week I think there was a huge concern. There was a shooting in Times Square, right, at a store where there were a couple of kids who were stealing merchandise from the store. The police came and there was an altercation, there was a shooting, and a tourist gets shot. one of the kids, the shooter, he's enrolled in our public schools. And he is living in a shelter that is in my district. And so when the NYPD gave the press conference saying, he is 15 years old, I believe, and he is in our public schools and live in this shelter, I immediately got so many messages like, do you know which school he's enrolled? Is it my kid's school? What's going to happen with this child? So there is just this sense of insecurity, I think, that this was one case, but it is true, like every day now, the schools are receiving new students, and we know that there is no vetting at the border. We know that there is no process to understand who is coming, who is not coming. And so I think there is a lot of sense of insecurity. And again, this is like, we all have seen an increase in violence and bullying in our schools since COVID, the mental health issue in our children. It's been very difficult, and the data has shown this year, in my district in particular, has stabilized. But last year there was an increase, and there were many, many cases of violence. And so people were already concerned, and then when you put something else on another extra layer of insecurity, I think parents are feeling very concerned about safety in their schools. And one important thing to know as well is that the city is in a very difficult financial situation, right? Because of the migrant crisis, and because of we never really recovered from COVID, as measured to address this financial crisis, the mayor, for example, canceled a class of 250 school safety agents that was supposed to graduate now, and our schools are in desperate need of more school safety agents. These are
the uniformed, not necessarily armed, but
not necessarily
they're the personnel
armed,
within the school to provide safety.
Exactly. And they provide safe corridors for children to, in areas that we know there's violence, they provide safe corridors for children to get to the transportation, to be able to go home. There are a number of schools, for example, in my district that there's one particular school where parents have complained multiple times. There are multiple entrances, and there are not enough safety agents to be in all the entrances. And so, those entrances are open and are vulnerable. Yes. And so we have been asking for more school safety agents for many years now. Since I joined the Community Education Council, there have been parents always asking for more school safety agents. And then this year, when we thought we would get 250 more for the city, it just got canceled to save, expenses. And so there's been a huge impact in terms of not only, you're adding more insecurity, but also at the same time, you're not providing the tools for schools to be able to protect our students and their buildings.
So that's a specific example. They're short 250 safety officers. There are other budget cuts, though, that have come.
Yes.
Food, cafeteria services?
Yes, so cafeteria is the latest one that also our community is very upset about. There are a number of items on the school menus that have been cut to save money. It was explicitly saying that. There's a memo from the food department at the Department of Education saying that. And so, yes, this is the latest. But what Mayor...
What does that mean? Do we know what those lunches look like now?
I don't know
specifics,
but yes, there have been apparently very popular items that, I think salad bars, salad bars are very popular, but a lot of the food that is more fresh and that it's harder to manage and
it's
more perishable, more expensive, exactly, they have been cut. And so I think that is a huge concern for a lot of families. Okay. But, it's important for, I think, New Yorkers to understand that, Mayor Adams said that every single agent is going to have to cut 5%, right? And then he went back, he restored all the cuts on the NYPD, on the fire department. But we're going to have to deal with this financial crisis. There's no running, there's no escaping. We're going to have to deal with. And school is one of our biggest items on the city budget.
Yeah. No easy solutions.
No easy solutions.
How do we get out of this, do you think? What would you do? You have any recommendations for school officials, for Mayor Adams, for the federal government? I'm sure you have a few things to
Yeah,
say.
it's not a city problem, right? This is now a federal problem. I mean, I do think we need to follow federal law at the southern border, and what is happening now, it's completely lawless. I am an immigrant. I'm not against immigration. I was a legal immigrant here. My husband's family recently came as, war refugees from the Ukrainian war. There was a process for them to come. We had to provide documentation. We had to go through a vetting process to really prove that they were not able to go back to their hometown and that they lost everything during the war. And so I think immigrants like myself just look at this and cannot understand how now that we just have an open border without any vetting process, right? I think we need to have a rational immigration policy that allows for immigrants to come, but in a way that at least we know if they are in the terrorist watch list or not, like at the minimum, right? And then, I mean, we are going to need to rethink about what are the benefits that are being offered for immigrants here. Because I do think New York City has made this crisis worse for ourselves by providing so many incentives for people to come here. So
why is that making it worse?
Well, because if you come to New York City, you receive housing. In some circumstances, you are staying in a very nice hotel, like in Manhattan. In a $200 per night hotel room. We are offering meals. We're offering a number of benefits. Just now, Mayor Adams has a new program where giving cards that the families can use to buy necessities. Which again, no immigrant has ever received this type of benefits before, and so now.
But isn't that helping the children when they have that more stable living situation?
Yes, it is helping, and that's what I say sometimes is an impossible situation, because of course you don't want all the immigrants to come here and not have any ways of supporting themselves, but at the same time we need to be conscious that we are creating incentives for people to come, because
more people to come.
Yes, exactly, and to come to New York City in particular, because not every other city or other state is offering the same things, right? Nobody's saying if you come to San Francisco, we're going to put in a hotel. Or if you go, I don't know, to Miami, we're going to put in a hotel. So
if they can, they'll choose New York over San Fran.
Yes. If here I have a hotel room and here I don't have housing and I need to figure out for myself, of course, I would also choose to come to New York City. And so we have made the crisis worse for New York City. And, if you look at the TikTok, one of the biggest searches is Sueño Americano, which it really, like, people are seeing, I can get to the U.S. now, and if I make myself to New York City, I have access to a hotel room in Times Square.
Sueño Americano.
Sueño Americano, the American dream. The American dream. And so there's more than 1 billion views of Sueño Americano on TikTok. And so these are all policy decisions that have, ramifications and side effects, and then it creates stimulus and incentives for people to come.
Yeah. Okay, so that's definitely a specific thing that you would say to the city.
Yes.
And you've already voiced what you would say to the federal government as well. And in fact, you had the opportunity to testify at Congress about that.
Yes.
I want to go back to the students, the immigrants in our schools. You mentioned trauma, especially for females. 6 in 10 have suffered sexual violence. But their brothers have seen their sisters abused, and it's been a traumatic trauma, right?
Yes.
Trauma is many of these immigrants across the land border have experienced a lot of trauma. How has that manifested in our schools?
So I really try to focus on my testimony on things that I had data, because of course you are, talking to Congress, but But
do you know stories or,
There are a lot of stories. There are stories of, in schools where kids who have recently come then have attempted to perpetrate sexual violence, or they have expressed very violent and disruptive behavior in schools. And so, yes, I think unfortunately, as I said, like the schools were already in a very shaky situation in terms of student behavior, right? Since schools reopened, there has been an increase in violence and bullying. And then when you added this, I think it was an extra factor to make the schools even more chaotic. A lot of teachers now talk about this student behavior as one of the biggest problems that they are having. And it's not just in New York City, right? It's across the country. We have all post-pandemic, but I think again in New York City that has been there's an added factor, which is children who have just witnessed incredible violence at the border, and then when come here, when things are a little calmer, of course they start to process this, and sometimes they are repeating the same behaviors in our school buildings.
Pretty difficult situation at all levels, the
Yes.
city, state, and federal. And obviously we've seen parties fighting back and forth over immigration. You said to me something that has stuck with me, which was, it seemed during COVID, we made decisions that put adults in front of children.
Absolutely.
And that we're doing the same thing with immigration.
Absolutely. I mean, New York City deprioritized children. Children were last in the list of priorities for New York lawmakers during the entirety of COVID. I mean, as I mentioned, I could go to a restaurant, I could go to the gym. My son could not go to, his third grade school. Like, which society in the world makes those type of decisions, right? Madison Square Garden was completely open with full capacity for music concerts. My son, who is 4 years old, was still masked at his preschool. Again, which society thinks that music concerts for adults, it's more important than children in preschool who are learning to read, who are learning to speak, who they need to see their teachers' mouths. I try to explain to people what is the impact of these policies. Imagine, everybody knows that period pre-5, it's so important, right? For language development, for brain development, for cognitive development, like all the research shows that. If every day you're going to school and your teacher is reading you in story time with a mask, and you and all your peers have masks, like you don't learn the phonics, you don't learn the sounds, you don't see their mouths. Your emotional development is very hindered because you are not seeing the emotions of your classmates and then learning how to adjust your behavior. So this generation of children are delayed in New York City because they were the last group to be unmasked. It was the toddlers. It was in preschools. The entire city was open and the toddlers were still masked. And so we are seeing this now. I mean, when the kids who are now in first grade, kindergarten, they have delays, and we're seeing that they are not progressing adequately. Yeah. And I think what concerns me the most is that instead of tackling that problem, first and really looking and then addressing and saying, okay, here we're going to do, what is New York State doing? They are literally lowering the standards of the state test so we cannot track. Like, we're not going to have data unless it's national data, which is the NAEP, the NAEP test. We're not going to have tests because what the Board of Regents in New York, which is the state board that does education policy, has said, and they have said this publicly in meetings, like there is in video, they said, we're accepting the post-COVID as the new normal. And they are literally lowering the standards for the new state test. And what that means for a mother like me, I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. What you're telling me is that what I expect my 10-year-old to do when he was in third grade, I should now expect less from my second child when he reaches third grade. That is unacceptable. Yeah. It's completely unacceptable. Now they are literally like giving up on a generation of children and saying, you all are not going to learn as much as, you know, the older children. And it's completely unacceptable. And, you know, as a mother, I could never do this with my two children. And I think as a society, we cannot do this. We need to accept the learning gaps, look at the data, you know, objectively, see that the gaps that we have are very huge, and then really tackle them, really address them, instead of trying to mask with, you know, masking the data and changing standards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with the influx of immigrants, it's obviously a lot harder to do that.
Yes, I think it will be a lot hard to do that because, I mean, as I said here, you just have, you know, an extra population of really students with a lot of needs coming to our system, and our schools were just absolutely not prepared to deal with that.
Do you see any bright spots in the years ahead?
So here's what I see as bright spots. 1 in 6 children now in New York City are in charter schools here.
1 in
6
are in charter schools.
New York State is the second highest growth of homeschooling families, yes, across the country. Even though we are the worst state for homeschooling in terms of policies, we don't offer any benefits for homeschooling families. We have pretty difficult bureaucracy for you to actually be able to homeschool. Even California has more benefits for homeschooling families. So I think a lot of parents are saying, you know, the system's not serving my child. I'm going to take things on my own, and either I'm going to homeschool or I'm going to look for an alternative. Even if you talk about with Catholic schools in New York City, their enrollment is increasing for the first time in a long time. So there are a lot of parents who are, you know, just seeing that they cannot trust the school system and really taking charge. I think this is exciting. I think that last year, the last legislative session, the state passed a small increase in the cap of charter schools in New York City. So here we have a cap. You cannot open any more charter schools, but they allow a small number to be open. So we're going to have some new schools. I really think we need a lot of new, high-performing, innovative schools that are created, you know, for specific groups that have different needs, right? I really believe in that. And so
could there be a charter school for these recently arrived immigrants, do you think?
Definitely. And I think there are already some charter schools, you know, designed for children who speak other language, or even
like the
who
one
have,
you started, right?
Yes, or even who have language disabilities. So I do think that there are many schools that, you know, can fill specific gaps where our public schools are not really being able to serve students and families. And so
do our public schools, but they're equipped with ESL teachers and the like, right?
So there are a couple of schools that have bilingual programs, but again, you need to plan for that, right? You cannot just like, okay, I need an ESL teacher tomorrow. It's hard to find teachers who have ESL certification, you know, who have that experience. So, and the way this has happened in our schools, it's you know, you're getting 10, 50 students tomorrow. So it's very hard to plan when you don't have any kind of stability in the system or predictability in terms of who's going to be your student population.
Yeah. And with budget cuts, it's going to be that much more difficult, right? To
For
hire
sure,
more teachers.
For sure, yes. But yes, I do think that the bright spots are the areas where, you know, you have new schools and you have more choice, and parents then can find specifically what is best for their children.
Well, we'd love to have you on again at a later time to talk about if that ever happens and other issues within education. So thanks again for coming on New York Insider.
Thank you so much.